This first song is entitled Keep Calling Him, written by Maya Joe.
reading today is from Rays of the One Light, weekly commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. Again, week 30, do you need a guru? Swami was asked this question in an interview. He said, no, you don't need a guru. Just do your practices as best you can. But if you find that you're not able to get to God on your own, you need a guru. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Many people scoff at the idea of having a guru. True to human nature generally, they make a virtue of their scoffing. I am responsible for what I do, they announce, responsible for my mistakes as well as for my victories. What would I ever learn if I handed over my development to someone else? To depend on another for guidance would be an act of spiritual cowardice. It would be understandable for someone gifted with some trivial abilities, for instance with words, to insist on doing his crossword puzzle himself without letting anyone else help him. But supposing, even in such trivial matters, he had no such gift, what virtue would there be in refusing to learn? For that matter, moreover, where do our gifts come from? They are not a native ability. Still, crossword puzzles are hardly an important challenge. What if a person wanted to do something daring, to climb a cliff, for instance, but refused to study the art of mountain climbing? He would climb at the risk of his life. And how much more is risked than physical life in the great adventure of the divine search, where the risk is to salvation itself? Where is the sacrifice in seeking guidance? Even a mountain guide wouldn't presume to do one's climbing for one. His purpose would be only to help the neophyte to climb safely. To have a wise guru is not a sign of weakness, but of plain common sense. All the saints, aware as they are of the hazards of the adventure, agree on the importance of having a guide or guru. And these are the heroes speaking, not cowards or spiritual weaklings. Jesus emphasized the importance of having a teacher by asking John to baptize him. In the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 3, we read of his coming to John. Thus Jesus said to John, "It becometh us to fulfill all righteousness." In the Bhagavad Gita, the 4th chapter, Sri Krishna says, "Open thyself to those who have attained wisdom. They will be thy teachers. Ask questions of them, both verbally and mentally. Serve them faithfully and with devotion." How is the devotee to recognize one who has attained wisdom? The Bhagavad Gita gives us this inspiring description of the sage. "By this sign is he known, being of equal grace to comrades, friends, chance comers, strangers, lovers, enemies, aliens, and kinsmen, loving all alike, evil or good. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind." Om, Om, Om. Good morning. I'm Vajra, not to be confused with Vajra Madden, who has blue suspenders. This is Pavani. And you may have noticed in our musician's lair, is not the usual suspects, but two gentlemen. Two gentlemen not of Verona, as Shakespeare would have it, but two gentlemen of Palo Alto. And thank you for sharing today's service with us, Saiganesh and Navashen. And, or did I say that wrong? Navashen? Navashen, okay. I have trouble with hearing my name too. Anyway, we are blessed with their presence today. The 50th anniversary celebration and temple dedication among other things, strongly underscored the global nature of this work. And today, being blessed with their presence, it may be tempting to think of our Palo Alto Guru Bhais. I have to be careful here because we have a very strong contingent of ex-Palo Altans here. It may be tempting to think of them as coming from another planet or perhaps even a distant galaxy. We've been watching Star Trek reruns. It would be more accurate to recognize that what they share with us gives us different facets of that same diamond that is these teachings, and is helpful in broadening and deepening our own understanding of the truths that are at the very core of not just this path, but really of all paths. If you saw the dedication, you got that from all the speakers for all the major religions of the world. So with no further ado, it is my pleasure to present a man who needs no introduction. Oh, Saiganesh.
Good morning, everyone. It's been a joy sharing this weekend with everyone here. As Vajra mentioned, Navashen and I live and serve in our community in Palo Alto, and it's been our pleasure and honor being here and spending this weekend with all of you. You know, Vajra was referring to the aliens in Palo Alto or from people from another planet. I've noticed over the years, there's a secret password or key to making connections with devotees, no matter where they're from. Any dinner table conversations, if you find strangers, you just have to ask one question. How did you find the spiritual path? Or how did you find Yogananda's teachings? How did you come to Ananda? And as soon as you ask that question, no matter what setting it is or where you are, which community in the world you are at, immediately people are drawn closer to their own heart. People are drawn closer to their own center because they start thinking about the first time they recognize something. This light of spirituality that touched them in some way. Maybe the autobiography of a yogi that was gifted to them by someone. Or, maybe they took a meditation class. Or maybe a friend told them about Ananda or, about Yogananda. And we're drawn back to that moment where we have that recognition from our heart, not just through our ideas and our mind. And not too long back, somebody who was very new to Ananda in Palo Alto, asked me that question. And I started giving my own story. I told him, I read the autobiography of a yogi and I was deeply touched. And I immediately knew that I had to learn these teachings, I had to practice them, and somehow these would help me in my life. And he asked me what exact month and year was it. And I was quite hazy, I wasn't sure. So I had to go back and look at the calendar of my own life. And then I realized it was perhaps around late fall of 2008 that I read the book. And then I've shared this story with some of my friends. But my tryst with the autobiography of a yogi began long before that. I bought the book when I was 11 years old. I was around 22 when I read the book in 2008. And it's an interesting story. I have a brother who's elder to me, and there's a significant age difference between us. He's almost 9 years older than me. So when I was 11 years old, he was already in college. And one of his friends was visiting our home, and they both were having this conversation about a book. And I was somehow drawn into this conversation. They were describing this book, the autobiography of a yogi, and all the interesting stories that it had, all these miracles, these men who could fight tigers with their bare hands. This was the story that I found most interesting. This other guy who, if he chose not to, he could just simply not appear on a photograph. I'm like, wow, that's interesting. So, I was a very curious 11-year-old, and my interest was immediately piqued. And just a few days after that, there was a book fair in the city where I lived. So my parents, agreed to send me there, and I went with my cousin. who was the exact same age as me. So both of us, just two 11-year-olds, we go to the book fair, and I remember all these almost irrelevant details. My mom gave me 50 rupees. 50 rupees now in 2019, if any of you are familiar or go to India, it can barely buy you a candy bar. It's, economy has shifted a lot over the years. But back in those days, in 96, 97, it was not, it was a reasonable sum of money to buy books or buy other things. So my cousin and I go to this book fair, and my mom told me, you can spend it any way you want. You can buy books if you want, or buy some snacks, or do whatever you wish, but that's all I'm going to give you. So I go there, and immediately in the very first bookstall, the first book that catches my eye is the autobiography of Yogi, and I remember that name very well. It was just a few days back that somebody had mentioned it to me. And I opened the book and I start flipping through the pages, and I saw all these pictures of these men sitting in meditative posture. And you could just feel, even from that picture, the stillness of their soul. And especially the cover picture, Master's picture that you see here on the altar, with this long hair and orange robes and piercing eyes. And it was almost hard to say, his picture is so androgynous. It's hard to say whether this was a man or a woman, but I knew this was a man. So the book was exactly 50 rupees. And so it was a tough decision. I had just entered the book fair, had the whole afternoon to spend and go back home. But somehow I was so tempted, I think it was just my curiosity more than anything else. I bought the book. But, I'm sure all of you have read the autobiography. It's a heavy read for 11-year-old. You had to refer to the dictionary a few times, every page or so. I didn't go, too deep into it. I don't know, maybe I did 8 pages, 10 pages, 15 pages. I picked it up from time to time. I have some, very abstract memories of reading or trying from time to time, but I didn't actually read at all. It was probably for an hour or two, and then I put it down. But I always carried it with me. I knew there would be a moment in my life when I would read this book, and it would be profound and perhaps life-changing, who knew? And after my high school, then I moved to a different town in India for college, and I had the book with me, and I didn't read it, 4 years of college. And then I was in my first job again in a different city in India. I was living there, and I was doing very well, and I was happy. I was independent. I had my own place, and I was going on a trip somewhere. I traveled a lot in those days. I loved traveling alone, and I liked traveling by train. And I was going on this fairly long train journey, and I wanted to take a book with me. And I didn't, this was the first book that was there. I don't even think it was my first choice. I was looking for something to take with me, and this was what was there. So I take the autobiography of Yogi and I start reading it. And that was a critical moment, I would say, perhaps in this incarnation for me, because everything started shifting. And the book opened up to me in a way that I did not know was possible. I started reading it. I think by the time it was night, I was somewhere in the section where Master had already seen Yukteswar, and he was in Master's hermitage, and all those different chapters that come around that place in the book. I was simply overcome. I was crying. If you've traveled in trains in India, there are what these call berths. There are these very small sections within a compartment, and you're like close to a lot of people, but then you just have your own sleeping space that's just tiny, very narrow. And I was in one of those berths in the middle, and I had this book with me, and I was just completely overcome. I was crying. I didn't know, I didn't think of myself as an emotional person, but I was just touched in a way that I've never felt before. I had tried a few different things. I knew I wanted something deep and spiritual in my life. I tried meditation. I had gone to various ashrams or done this or done that. But the autobiography was a very unique experience that time when I read it. And I clearly remember a couple of thoughts I had in my mind. One of them was simply that, wow, this man thinks exactly like I do. Now that I think about it, it almost sounds a little presumptuous, but it really wasn't. It was just what I thought. And I knew he was not alive in his body. Yogananda had already passed on. And I thought, if he was alive, I think I would really get along with him. I would really like to meet him. And these were the consistent thoughts in my head that were going on. To think of, where I'm standing right now, to understand what these lineage of gurus represent, who Yogananda was, who this great avatar was, who came to the West to bring these teachings for this age, it almost feels silly to say that, oh, he thinks exactly like I do. But I think what I was really feeling was that what I was reading in this book was a reflection of my own higher self. It was not different from that. And more than anything, it was a recognition that it was my own, that this was not something separate from me. This was not something that I had to go learn from. This was just a reflection of who I was, or rather, as it was being mentioned a few minutes back, what my aspirations were, the aspirations of my heart were. And until that point, I was 22, so not a whole lot of wisdom until then. I always imagined, I think a lot of us do it, probably has nothing to do with age, that I want these deep teachings. I want spirituality in my life. I'm so inspired when I read these books. I know there is something out there that's deeply meaningful in our own lives. But also this belief that I have to read all these books and I will go to all these places. I'll take the best of everything from everywhere and I'll just put it in a Vitamix and blend it in high speed, and that'll be my smoothie. I'll customize, that'll be my own. It cannot come from just one source. Somehow I need to just do that hunting for myself and find all these ingredients that I wanted. I think that in itself is fairly American. I think American too in my past lives. Just like this idea that I want to customize everything. That somehow, the default setting is just not for me. I need to be able to pick and choose and decide what suits me the best. But thank God, thank Babaji, thank Master, thank Divine Mother. For some reason, when I read the autobiography of a yogi, it became very clear to me that perhaps I don't need to do that. Perhaps what Yogananda was talking about, I could just take it and it'll work quite fine for me. That this will be what I'm actually looking for. That these teachings that Yogananda was talking about was in fact that which I've been searching for all this while. The very first sentence in the autobiography of a yogi, I'm sure it has been quoted in many lectures before. It's simply this: the characteristic one of the characteristic features of the Indian culture has long been the search for eternal verities and the concomitant disciple-guru relationship. And oftentimes people, I know Asha makes a lot of references to the fact that Yogananda calls it the disciple-guru relationship, referring to the fact that the guru's presence, the guru's coming, is simply a response to our own attitude as a disciple. It's not that there's somebody out there and then we become disciples. But the word that I want to mention today and bring our attention to is the word concomitant. It's one of those words that make it hard for an 11-year-old. But I had to look it up in the dictionary. The word, it's pretty self-evident because of the context where it's used. But the word simply means naturally accompanying or following. And the very first sentence in that book is that, the search for eternal verities and the concomitant disciple-guru relationship. And you look at the world around, in an ascending age like this, there's a lot of good news we hear. There's a lot of kindred spirits that we find everywhere in the world. A large section of the population is looking for eternal verities, is looking for those truths that are not subject to the vagaries of human behavior. But they don't yet find the disciple-guru relationship concomitant. It's just not self-evident, because somehow this becomes a confusing question. Do I need a guru? The answer is not always clear to us. I teach meditation and Raja Yoga and some of these beginning classes in Palo Alto. I've been teaching for a while. And this is a deeply philosophical question, but it's also a very common question that you're faced with every so often. You meet somebody, they're drawn to something. They like the Sunday services, they like meditation, they like the people here, they're interested in learning Kriya Yoga, but somehow this whole idea of discipleship is just not so sure, just trying to figure it all out. And I was talking to a person like that, again, this is probably 2 or 3 months ago. And I knew this was a very intellectual man. He was in the tech industry, and he was very sincere. Meditation was not hard for him. He was naturally drawn to it, and he was very interested in Kriya Yoga. So, but, this whole question of discipleship was just a little tricky for him. He wasn't too sure. So I told him, why don't you just come, let's go for a walk. And in my own mind, I'd already decided, this man is so interested in learning Kriya Yoga. I need to explain to him what discipleship is. It's not scary. It's all good, I'll tell him how the ego, you're trying to transcend the ego. You cannot do it just by using your ego. You have to let go of those whims and fancies. The spiritual path is all about, surrender and self-offering and all of this. I went on this long monologue explaining all these things to him, and at the end of it, he just paused and told me, Saiganesh, I understand all that you're telling me, but I come to Ananda and I look at Yogananda and all these pictures, I just don't feel the way you all feel. I don't feel like bowing in front of the altar. I don't feel like putting flowers over there. And then I realized at that moment, first of all, it's not helpful when you go into conversations with assumptions of your own. But then I told him, that's great. Don't worry about discipleship. It's not a big deal. You're sincere, you're meditating, you're trying your best, and you're dedicating yourself to that quest, to that search for eternal verity. Eventually, you'll find it concomitant that you will need a pole star. You will need a guiding light in your own life that can show you how to get there. But until then, just keep sincerely trying. It's almost ironical in the English language that the word disciple and discipline have the same root. If we think that somehow we have to discipline ourselves to feel a certain way, to relate to the pictures or to the altar, to the people around us in a certain way, that's not quite cutting it. That's not helpful. Then what we are choosing is not discipleship, but a dogma. Discipleship is a lot more natural. Pavani was referring to some of the things that we discussed yesterday in our workshop, where we discussed this phrase, the natural love of the heart. How this love is the most natural thing there is. And discipleship is equally natural. And that's what we discover as we make progress and move in our own spiritual journey. Some days back, probably a few weeks back, somebody sent me this video. This has been going around in Palo Alto, and we have been discussing this quite a bit in the last few weeks. This video of a disciple of Ramana Maharishi sharing the story of Lakshmi the Cow. Ramana Maharishi, for those of you who don't know, he was a great sage who lived in South India. He was a contemporary of Master. And Master met him. There's this beautiful video of them interacting. And he was a very highly realized soul, and he had some great disciples too. But his work was very different from Master. He primarily led a very inward life. He didn't have a large outward work, and those who were drawn to him came to the ashram. And Lakshmi the Cow was one of his foremost disciples. So this was a cow that was given to the ashram, and that cow took an instant liking to Ramana Maharishi. And it was always drawn to his presence, and the cow would always sit at his feet. And they just had a relationship that everybody understood, because they knew, all the disciples in the ashram, Lakshmi is relating to Ramana Maharishi the same way that we are all relating to him. She doesn't have all those accoutrements of, ego, but it's just the most natural response that she had when she was in that presence of that light, when she was in that presence of that divine love. She was responding the only way that she knew how to, that she always wanted to be in his presence. It was almost impossible to take her away from Ramana Maharishi at the end of the day. And Ramana also responded the same way. This man shares a lot of stories. I'm sure you can find this video on YouTube. You can Google it. There's so many stories that he tells of the relationship between the two of them. There's one story that he says when, it's a summer month and it's very hard to find grass to graze or, fodder to feed the cow. So they just give the cow whatever they're able to. And then all the residents of the ashram eat the meal together. And before the meal is served in the dining hall, Ramana Maharishi first takes his meal. Only then the disciples are all fed. And so everybody is waiting in the dining hall, and they take the food to Ramana, and he says, I can't eat this. And then he says, did you feed Lakshmi? And they immediately realized that they're so in tune that he knew that Lakshmi did not get enough food today, and they immediately had to go find food and feed her, and then he would eat, and then everything would go on as usual. There's this other beautiful story that he tells of how somebody made a very humble donation to build a cowshed. The ashram did not have any cows. Lakshmi was the only cow there, so she was just like hanging out. She didn't have a cowshed or a place for herself. So this man made a humble donation to build like a cowshed, a hut or something. And then they start working on it, and Ramana Maharishi gets directly involved. He generally was so detached, he barely spoke, he was not involved in any of the functioning of the ashram, nothing organizational. And he got really involved in this project. And he said, we shouldn't be building it here. And then he walks somewhere and picks up a large piece of plot, and he marks it, and he says, you should build a shed here. And it was not any ordinary shed. They had to get the best of the best, and this man is describing this. We didn't have any such building in the ashram till that date. But Ramana Maharishi was clear. That's what he wanted for Lakshmi. And there was something that he said that was very interesting. He said, by doing this, all of you would get punya, that is, you would get great good karma by serving Lakshmi. That's why you should be building the shed, and you will see how the ashram will shift once you have Lakshmi in that shed. And that's really what happens. As soon as they build that shed, everything starts shifting in the ashram. People just start pouring in money, and so many more buildings get built and all of that. Now, I'm sharing that story because I was thinking about it, and it's perhaps the best illustration of what that relationship is, of how natural. Lakshmi did not listen to sermons on whether we need a guru. I mean, do you need a guru? Do I, Vajra quoted Swamiji. I love that phrase, when Swami was asked by somebody, do I need a guru? He said, no. And then he said, not unless you want to find God. So, it's almost a subjective question that's hard to answer, but it's hard to answer not because it's complicated, but because we approach it with our minds. Somehow we want to understand, we make it theological. Do I need a guru? Do I need a guru? Do I need a guru? Just like... And now we have to answer all of these flavors of just endless questions. And somehow we are trying to understand, and we lose sight of the fact that this is simply the most natural way that the human heart responds in the presence of divine light. You just offer yourself up. And if you have to define it with a bunch of rules and guidelines and what you can do and cannot do, then that's just creating dogma on top of it. But discipleship itself is quite simple. It's just our natural response when we find something that we recognize as our own, that we recognize as our own highest aspiration. Do I need a guru? I don't know. It's just, do I need flowers? Do I need music? Do I need blue sky? Do I need community? Do I need friendship? Do I need love? It's just, I don't know what the scientists will say, what Wikipedia will say. Maybe I need oxygen and an ideal temperature range, or water, or, protein and carbohydrates, whatever it is that you need for the human body. But the body might perish without those things. But what we're talking about is something so much deeper, because science, our minds rather, cannot comprehend it. Our minds cannot fully put a finger on it or explain it in those scientific terms. I do need music. I do need flowers. I do need blue skies. I do need friendship. I need an example of selfless love, not because my physical body will perish without these things, but because it is simply a reflection of my own soul. My own higher soul is reflected in beauty, in friendship, in love, in kindness. And that highest aspiration is really what we are seeking. When Swami left his body in 2013, there were quite a few memorial services in the following months. And I remember something that someone shared in one of those talks describing Swami's life. Talking of Swami, they said, people look at his life and think of him as, this great composer. He wrote so many books. We make a list of all the things he accomplished. Established 8 or 9 communities all around the world. Created this great work for Master. But she said, but what he actually did was simply this. He took the highest aspirations of our own heart and he gave it form. He gave it the form of music. He gave it the form of communities, the friendship that we share with each other. And that's really what he was doing on a day-by-day basis, is to create an external reflection of what it is that we are seeking. And the guru is simply that. Sometimes we are fortunate enough, the great good karma, as they say in India, to find a guru. Sometimes we have the great good karma to have that highest aspiration reflected in a personal form, in a human form, that comes to us as Yogananda, as Babaji, as Swamiji. We see these pictures on the altar, and they're simply reflecting that back to us. That love that we ourselves are capable of. And all that we have to do is find that natural way of relating to it, to relating to that light, so that we ourselves can open up and find, that pathway to divine. Because it's hard for us without that example, because that mind that makes this question so complex is simply not capable of taking us anywhere. It's simply not capable of giving us that realization or understanding. And the more we tune in, and the more we tune into our own hearts, we start seeing that reflection. And we see that guru that we project on the altar is simply inside us. That's really what Yogananda came to reflect back to us. There's this beautiful book by one of Yogananda's disciples, Kamala Silva. She called him the flawless mirror, because he was reflecting back to his disciples what they needed to see, what their own highest potential was. And if you were out of tune, in the presence of the guru, it was reflected back to you. And in the presence, not necessarily the physical presence, but even in the vibration of the guru. And that's why we need community. That's why we need each other. Because in that vibration, when we come together in his name, then we see that reflection. We see for ourselves the reflection of our aspirations. And we just go a little bit astray, and we see that reflected as well. And gives us an opportunity. It gives us an opportunity to learn. It gives us an opportunity to correct ourselves. And more importantly, most of all, it gives us the opportunity to open up. To have that open relationship in that anthropomorphic form. I don't have to imagine God in the abstract. I know what Master was like. I've heard of Babaji. I've seen this painting of Babaji, and then I see that reflection there. And now it's easier for me. Now I do know that I have a pathway to divine, and all I need to do is do my best to attune, to do my best to tune into that vibration, so that, the chatter of the mind, that incessant ego that is trying to guide us in its own whims and fancies, can finally be silenced, and we can perceive truth in its essence, in the way we are meant to. And then we will know what our own highest aspiration is, and that it is within reach. So, God bless you all. The song that Navashen and I are going to present now is called the Divine Mother Duet. It's an original French composition to which Swami rewrote the words. This was the last song that he wrote in his lifetime, and I think we heard it only after his passing. So it's a beautiful duet with two parts dedicated to Divine Mother.
Yes, it's she, the Divine Mother, she who made the universe. Yes, it's she, the Divine Mother, ruler of every heart's desire. Love more ancient, bliss eternal, may our hearts soon be merged in thee. Yes, it's she, the Divine Mother, she who made the universe. Yes, it's she, the Divine Mother,
ruler of every heart's desire, love more ancient, bliss eternal, may our hearts soon be merged in thee. Love more ancient, bliss eternal, may our hearts soon be merged in thee.
We've had a truly wonderful weekend with Saiganesh and Navashen. I want to thank them so much for the kirtan, for the workshop yesterday, and for everything about their participation in this service this morning. You know, within Ananda, there's a very strict taboo about trying to recruit from other communities. But it can be very tempting. Michael Fellows wanted me to remind you that this coming Saturday is the Chant for Peace, the 24-hour program at the Zen Monastery. And if you'd like more information about it, if you're thinking of going and if you would like to carpool, please just connect with Michael. It'd be a wonderful opportunity. This week we have yoga as usual on Wednesday and also on Saturday. And it's not too soon to start thinking about Raja, which will be starting in September. If you are interested in repeating it, or if you haven't taken it before, we'll be telling you a lot more about that in the near future too. Thanks.